All right, so we're going to take a deep dive today into some fascinating stuff. It's a little bit unsettling, too, to be honest.
Oh.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about Gen Z relationships and kind of the darker side of all that. You
Hmm.
sent over a ton of stuff, articles, surveys, and even like a psychologist's perspective. And honestly, some of this is pretty eyebrow-raising.
Well, yeah, I mean, what's really striking is that it doesn't even seem like just a few isolated cases. It really feels like this whole generation is shifting gears when it comes to love and commitment.
Yeah.
We've got this MTV India survey, for example. It paints a pretty stark picture. Only 13% of Gen Z respondents said they were in serious relationships.
Wow, 13%.
That,
That's a
yeah.
that's not a lot. Is it really that bleak? I mean, everyone knows young people are like constantly on dating apps.
Well, that's the thing, right? Even with all the swiping and matching going on, the desire for something serious just seems to be waning. 1 in 4 respondents in that survey even said they don't believe in marriage at all. So it's not just about delaying marriage or anything. It seems like a really fundamental shift in how they even view relationships.
Huh. So it's not just cold feet. It's like the whole concept of settling down is like out the window.
Yeah, in a way. A lot of these sources point to this emphasis on personal freedom and exploration that this generation seems to have. Gen Z seems hyper-focused on self-discovery and chasing their own goals. Maybe the traditional relationship model just feels like a roadblock to all that.
Hmm. It's like that saying you can't pour from an empty cup.
Hmm.
Maybe they feel like they need to fill themselves up first before they can like pour into a relationship.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to put it. And that's where this whole dark side we're talking about starts to emerge. Because all this drive for self-discovery often gets channeled into hookup culture, where, casual encounters take center stage. There's actually an article here that really digs into the psychological effects of this, and it's not all sunshine and roses.
Yeah, I was reading about that too. There's this constant tension between wanting connection, but being afraid of any kind of commitment.
Exactly. A lot of the sources suggest that hookup culture, while it offers a sense of freedom, and exploration, it often prioritizes physical intimacy over a genuine emotional connection. So you might have a ton of experiences, but they just lack depth or meaning. And in the long run, that can lead to feeling empty and even more isolated.
It's like they're trying to quench their thirst with a sip of water over and over again instead of taking a long, satisfying drink.
That's a great analogy. And this brings us to technology and the role it plays in all of this. It's a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
On the one hand, dating apps make it easier than ever to meet people. But on the other hand, those same apps can really create a sense of superficiality and instant gratification. Relationships become almost like transactions. Swipe right, hook up, and move on to the next one.
Yeah, it's like those choose your own adventure books, but for relationships. Except everyone's always looking for the next chapter instead of enjoying the story they're in.
And speaking of stories, there's this fascinating trend the articles highlight about Gen Z's obsession with public figures and influencers. It's like they're blurring the lines between reality and fantasy.
I've noticed that too, yeah. They're building these intense, almost worshipful relationships with people they've never even met. Which is weird, right? Because on the surface, Gen Z seems to be all about real-life experiences and rejecting their parents' way of doing things.
Right. It's a paradox. And the sources use terms like delusionships and parasocial relationships to describe this. It's like they're getting a taste of intimacy and connection, but it's distorted and ultimately unsatisfying. And it can actually harm their real-life relationships by setting these unrealistic expectations.
So they're craving connection, but they're also setting themselves up for disappointment by idolizing these figures that are just unattainable.
Exactly. And the sources suggest that this can make it even harder for them to form genuine, healthy bonds in the real world. It's a vicious cycle.
Okay, so we've got this generation that's craving connection but running from commitment. They're drowning in choices but starving for depth. They're blurring the lines between reality and fantasy. It all sounds a little messy.
That's a good way to put it. And we haven't even gotten to the really dark stuff yet. The sources also paint a pretty bleak picture of cheating and trust issues becoming rampant in Gen Z relationships.
Well, hold on. We're going there already.
Unfortunately, yeah. Infidelity is almost becoming normalized. And the sources suggest it's tied to all the things we've been talking about. The hookup culture, the lack of emotional connection, the ease with which people can connect online.
It's like technology has created this breeding ground for temptation.
Yeah.
And it's not just about physical cheating, right?
Right. Emotional cheating can be just as damaging. You can have whole relationships unfold online completely hidden from your partner. It's like an extra layer of complexity. and potential for heartbreak.
So we've got a recipe for disaster here.
Hmm.
Hookup culture, eroding emotional connection. Technology making cheating easier than ever. And social media blurring the lines of fidelity. No wonder trust is becoming such a huge issue.
And that erosion of trust, it
Mm.
kind of has this ripple effect. It makes it almost impossible to be vulnerable and really build those deep, meaningful connections.
Yeah, it's like that old saying, once bitten, twice shy. If you've been burned before, it's hard to open yourself up to the possibility of getting hurt again.
Exactly. And it creates this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You avoid commitment because you're afraid of getting hurt, which just leads to more shallow relationships, which just reinforces the fear.
It's a vicious cycle. And these sources, they don't really sugarcoat the psychological impact of all this. They're talking about a full-blown mental health crisis among young people. Anxiety, depression, the sense of purposelessness.
Yeah, I mean, it's not hard to see why. When your relationships are constantly in flux and you're just bombarded with these images of perfect lives on social media, it's easy to feel lost and inadequate.
It's like everyone else is winning at this game of love, except you.
Right. And that pressure to find the perfect partner, the perfect relationship, it just adds to the anxiety. They're constantly comparing themselves to others, chasing this elusive ideal that may not even exist.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty grim picture here. But I'm curious, are there any, signs of hope? Are there any Gen Zers out there pushing back against these trends?
Actually, yeah, the sources do point out that there is this growing movement within Gen Z to kind of reclaim authenticity and depth in their relationships. It's like they're recognizing the emptiness of the hookup culture and trying to find a different path.
Okay, so what does that look like? Are they ditching dating apps altogether, going back to writing love letters and courting each other under the moonlight?
Not quite that drastic. But they are getting more intentional about how they use technology. For example, instead of endlessly swiping on dating apps, they're using them more to filter for partners who share their values and desire for something more meaningful.
So they're using the tools at their disposal to try to hack the system in a way.
Exactly. And they're also getting much more direct and open in their communication. They're not afraid to have those tough conversations
Right.
about expectations, boundaries, what they're looking for in a relationship.
That's interesting because a lot of relationship advice from previous generations was all about playing it cool, not being too needy, waiting a certain amount of time before calling.
Right. But Gen Z is throwing out that old playbook. They're embracing vulnerability, honesty, and clear communication.
Which makes sense, because if you're both on the same page from the start, there's less room for misunderstandings and hurt feelings down the line.
And even if a relationship doesn't work out, that process of communicating their needs helps them learn more about themselves and what they're truly looking for in a partner. It's like they're treating relationships as opportunities for growth and self-discovery, even if they don't last forever.
It's like that Marie Kondo approach to relationships. If it doesn't spark joy, thank it for its service and move on.
Exactly. And speaking of finding what sparks joy, the sources highlight another interesting trend: the rise of alternative relationship models.
Okay, now we're talking polyamory, open relationships, all that.
Yes. While those models aren't new, Gen Z is approaching them with a new level of openness and acceptance. They're questioning the traditional one-size-fits-all approach to relationships and exploring different ways to structure love and commitment.
So it's not necessarily about rejecting monogamy altogether. It's more about finding the structure that works best for them and their partners.
Right. And one psychologist we read about even suggested that for some Gen Z individuals, these alternative models might actually be a healthier way to experience love and intimacy.
Really? How so?
The idea is that by allowing for multiple connections, they can potentially avoid some of the pitfalls of traditional monogamy, like feeling trapped or stifled. Of course, it's not a magic solution. And these models require a lot of communication and trust to work. But it's interesting to see how Gen Z is pushing the boundaries and redefining what a fulfilling relationship can look like.
It's like they're saying, hey, maybe there's more than one way to slice this love pie.
And on top of all that, they're also redefining what friendship and community mean in the digital age.
You mean those massive online communities centered around shared interests?
Exactly. For young people who feel isolated or misunderstood in their offline lives, those online connections can be incredibly meaningful. It's like they're creating their own support systems, unrestricted by geography or social circles.
It's almost like a modern-day version of pen pals.
Yes, and that can be a powerful antidote to the loneliness and alienation that many young people are experiencing.
Okay, so we've talked about how Gen Z is trying to reclaim authenticity, redefining commitment, and finding community online. But what about the emotional and mental health challenges we discussed earlier? Are there signs of hope there too?
There are, and it starts with awareness. This generation is much more open to talking about mental health than previous generations. They're not afraid to seek help when they need it. And luckily, there are more resources available now than ever before. Therapy apps, online support groups, even social media influencers who are talking openly about their struggles.
It's like they're creating a culture of care and understanding, where vulnerability is seen as a strength rather than a weakness.
Exactly. And it's not just about seeking professional help. They're also finding ways to support each other through online communities and peer-to-peer networks. They're sharing their experiences, offering advice, creating a sense of solidarity.
It's inspiring to see how they're taking care of themselves and each other.
It speaks to a deeper sense of resilience and hope. They're not just giving up on love and connection. They're finding new ways to make it work for them.
So what can we as a society learn from all of this? Because let's be honest, Gen Z's approach to relationships is pretty different from what a lot of us are used to.
I think the biggest takeaway is that there's no one right way to do relationships. The old rules are being rewritten, and that's okay. We need to be open to new possibilities, embrace change, and most importantly, prioritize communication and authenticity.
It's about meeting people where they are, listening to their needs, and supporting their journey, even if it looks different from our own right.
Absolutely. And maybe, just maybe, Gen Z is showing us a path towards a future where relationships are more equitable, more fulfilling, and more aligned with our individual needs and desires.
That's a future I'd love to be a part of.
Me too. And I think the key is to approach this with a sense of curiosity and a willingness to learn from each other.
Gen Z might be leading the charge,
Yeah.
but we can all benefit from their insights and innovations.
Absolutely. So let's keep listening, keep learning, and keep evolving our ideas about love and connection.
Because the future of relationships is being written right now. And it's up to all of us to shape it into something beautiful and meaningful. It's wild to think about how much the world has changed, even in just the last decade or so. It feels like Gen Z is facing this whole different set of challenges when it comes to love and relationships.
It's true. I mean, they've grown up with social media, economic uncertainty, climate change, a global pandemic. It's no wonder these traditional relationship models are being questioned.
It's like they're trying to build a house on shifting sand,
Yeah, that's a really powerful image. And in a way, they're kind of like pioneers, navigating this uncharted territory, trying to figure out what works in this new landscape.
But it's not without its risks, right, as we've been talking about.
Yeah.
The emotional toll, the trust issues, the potential for loneliness and disillusionment.
Absolutely. And that's why I think it's so crucial to have these conversations, to shed light on the complexities and challenges that Gen Z is facing.
And to approach it all with empathy and understanding. Because at the end of the day, we all want the same thing, right? To love and be loved, to feel connected and supported.
Couldn't agree more. And maybe, just maybe, by understanding Gen Z's journey, we can all learn to navigate this complex world of relationships with more awareness and a greater sense of possibility.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm kind of left with this mix of concern and hope.
Yeah, me too. I think the challenges are very real, but so is their resilience and their willingness to rewrite the rules.
It's like they're holding up this mirror to society, forcing us to confront our own assumptions about love and relationships.
And who knows? Maybe by observing their struggles and innovations, we'll discover new ways to love and connect that we never even imagined before.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to surface from this deep dive. Thanks for joining me on this fascinating exploration.
It's been a pleasure. And to our listener, we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought.